Look, I'm really proud to introduce our next guest speaker. I have done my own cyber investigation about Kashmir, and I was really lucky that I got to hang out with her this morning. How difficult could it be for us to unplug from 5 of the most powerful digital interfaces that each or most human beings that use the internet have to deal with? And if any of you have had the opportunity to dig into her story a bit more, there's some beautiful insights that she's going to share with each of us. So just want to get you all comfortable. For those of you that haven't yet set up your Slido, please do so. And I also just want to acknowledge you for using Slido really, really well. Some of you got roped into sharing who you were as anonymous, but I just want to say it's a safe place. You can stay anonymous if you wish, that is fine, but really, really grateful for that. I just want to also thank the team from Middleware New Zealand, who are the keynote speaker for today. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to bring Kashmir to Aotearoa, so we're really grateful for that. And without further ado, can we please do a big, massive round of applause for Kashmir Hill.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm just going to pour myself water before I start. So I am based in New York, and I came into Wellington a couple of days ago just so I could get over my jet lag. And while I had been to New Zealand before, more than a decade ago, I didn't have a chance to explore Wellington before. So it was really nice this weekend. I climbed Mount Vic and explored the city, which is so vibrant. And I love the art, except for this hand that looms over downtown with the face. I just think it's going to haunt my nightmares for years to come. Yes, I am a journalist. I'm currently with the New York Times, and I've been writing about technology and law and privacy for about a decade. And when I write about these things, I try to make my stories very personal and talk about how technology is changing our lives and often how it's causing problems for people. And so I will often do this by doing first-person stories where I try to immerse myself in some kind of environment or future dystopia so I can tell you what's to come and what we can do to possibly prevent it. So last year I did a story called The House That Spied on Me. And this was a story to explore how the Internet of Things is going to change our sense of privacy. So I turned my one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco into a smart home, bought all these kinds of internet-connected devices, and then my family and I had to live in this home, which was quite horrible. And I worked with a technologist, Surya Matu, who designed a router for me to capture all of the data that was leaving and coming into the house. And I just have a little video about that. Companies are offering us all kinds of internet-connected devices. Being smart means the device can connect to the internet, it can gather data, and it can talk to its owner. But once your appliances can talk to you, who else are they going to be talking to? I turned my one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco into a smart home. Basically, the goal of the experiment was to find out how much it would be monitoring my family and myself. I already had an Amazon Echo, the smart speaker, we had a Vizio smart TV, but I bought a bunch of other devices.
I built a special router that let me look at all the network activity. We were seeing what her ISP could see, but more importantly, what they could sell.
We ran the experiment for 2 months. In that 2 months, there wasn't a single hour of digital silence in the house.
One thing we discovered is that the devices, almost all the devices, talk to the companies that made them. The TV was sending a lot of information out about the Hulu shows we watched to data brokers, so people that track people's behavior. One of the funny things about living in a smart home is how easy it was to forget that all of these devices were recording us and tracking our activity. These things don't look like cameras. The coffee maker doesn't look like it's recording us. So it was really easy to forget that it was happening. What was significant to me about this is that it was allowing tracking to move off of computers and off of screens and actually into my home. and just getting this really like basic, boring information, but revealing information about how we live our lives. I guess it just bothers me that it's like tracking moving into our physical lives instead of just in a place that we can kind of at least control because we're on a screen.
We've long been told that if it's free, you're the product. But with the Internet of Things, it seems even if you pay, you're still the product. So you really have to ask, who is the true beneficiary of your smart home? You or the company mining you?
So to the extent that our identity is predicated on the ability to control the information that people know about us, this story was incredibly depressing because there was so much data that was leaving my home and going through these devices. We already owned an Echo. I don't know how big smart speakers are. How many of you have a smart speaker in your home? So I guess they're pretty big here as well. In the US, 1 in 4 households now has a smart speaker, an Echo or a Google Home or Apple HomePod. And it's really becoming evident that these companies don't really appreciate the access to information that we're giving them. So there's recently been a lot of outrage over the fact that in order to test these products, to make sure that they're understanding the customers, these companies have been sharing the conversations that you have with the products with strangers, with contractors who listen to the conversations and see the extent to which the device understood what you were saying. And people have been really upset about this because they weren't notified this was going to happen unless it was in the small print of the contract that they didn't read. And the settings to opt out of this were very hidden. The most disturbing story I think I've ever written about the invasiveness of a connected product was a sex toy made by a Canadian company. And it was, everything gets connected to the internet eventually. This was a device that connected via Bluetooth to the internet so that if you and your partner were in different places, you could have the device with you and your partner could control the device. But the company, the future is so wonderful. The company that made this device was collecting information about every time it was turned on, the settings that were used on the device, how long it was used for, and how hot the toy got. I went to the company and I asked, why are you doing this? And they said, well, it's great for market research. So they were mining this incredibly intimate data about one of the most private human experiences because it helped them to make better toys. I did not get that device for my smart home. But after doing this story, where I was just immersing myself in surveillance capitalism, I wanted to get as far away from technology as possible, or at least do a piece about resistance. And so I decided to do this piece about living life without the big 5 tech giants. So that is Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, which I think is represented here today, and Apple. And I thought, this would be a great opportunity to talk about how hard it is to kind of take back control from these companies that have become so large and so powerful, these American companies. And I'm often very critical of these companies. And the feedback I will get is, Google is great, Facebook is great, they make all these great products for free. Why are you criticizing them all the time? If you don't like the companies, why don't you just not use their products? No one's forcing you to do that. And so I wanted to explore that question. Is it possible to reject these companies if you are a critic? This wasn't a particularly novel idea. Journalists before have tried to step away from these companies. Sometimes they actually do. Sometimes they just think hypothetically, which would be the hardest to give up. But I wanted to do it in a more rigorous way. Because as a technology journalist, I know that we interact with these companies all the time in invisible ways without realizing it. You're not just interacting with Facebook when you're on Facebook.com. They have trackers that are on many different websites that follow you around, and it's why you get these creepy ads on Instagram that make you think that your phone is secretly listening to your conversations. So I went to a technologist named Dhruv Mehrotra, and I said, I want to do this experiment where I'm really preventing these companies from getting my data, getting my attention, getting my time, getting my money. I want to completely cut myself off from them. So he went and did a little research and came back to me and said, I think I have a pretty easy way for us to do this. All of these companies publish the list of IP addresses that they control. Do people here know basically what IP addresses are? Okay, so they're kind of like the roadmap of the internet. It's how one device talks to another device, how they find each other. So these IP addresses, to overly simplify, represent the servers that these companies control and the devices that they control. So if your device tries to connect to one of these IP addresses, you're trying to essentially interact with this company. So he said, I can make a virtual private network for you, a VPN, where I will just block the IP addresses of everyone, of any particular company that you're trying to block. And he said he didn't think it would be a perfect solution, but he thought it would work. And we did run into a couple of problems, but it was sufficient. And so I went through and blocked each of the companies one at a time. And in the final week, I blocked them all. The other benefit of doing it this way was that his network could capture how often I tried to interact with the companies, even when I was trying to avoid them. So I decided to start with Amazon, just because Amazon was the company I thought would be hardest to break from my life. We had a lot of Amazon products in our home. We had the Echo. We'd also gotten an Echo Dot for the smart home experiment. My husband and I both had Amazon Prime accounts that we are separately paying over $100 a year for, which we actually got criticized for when my article came out, because people are like, you don't both have to pay for Amazon Prime. There's Amazon Household, and you can just have one account that you pay for. So we're now saving some money. We both had Amazon Prime credit cards. We had Kindles. We had Amazon Prime Video on our TV. We shopped at Whole Foods. I was really a huge Amazon addict. I have the Amazon app on my phone, and ever since I became a parent, I have a 2-year-old. As a result of this exercise, I went through and looked at my spending on Amazon, and it had just skyrocketed since my daughter was born, because every time we need something, I would just turn to the Amazon app and put it in my cart or just order it right away. So I thought it would be really hard to give it up. But the hardest part about actually giving up Amazon wasn't not shopping there. I was able to find other places to buy things online. There are still real-world shops that you can go to. The biggest problem was life without Amazon Web Services. And I imagine this room probably knows this, but the most profitable part of Amazon is not its huge retail business. It's Amazon Web Services, which is a cloud hosting service that Amazon set up about a decade ago, which just hosts websites and hosts content for apps, so that companies don't have to, build their own servers and host their own content. They can rely on Amazon servers, which are all around the world. And so when I stopped using Amazon, it meant that about a third of websites stopped working for me, and it meant that many apps on my phone stopped working, including a lot of, speaking of kids' privacy, like child surveillance apps that we used primarily for my daughter's daycare. And some of these things we could live without, but some of them were just very surprising to me, because the big thing is that we lost all access to movies and digital entertainment, because everybody was using Amazon to host their content, including Amazon competitors like Netflix. Netflix and Amazon Prime are competing to have original content because they want to attract these audiences. And to my great surprise, Netflix stopped working. They use AWS to host their movies. So I found during this week without Amazon, it was incredibly challenging. Technically, I just could not avoid it. Part of the reason was we discovered a flaw with the blocker that Dhruv had made for me. It was blocking Amazon IP addresses. But the way the web is architected is that a lot of websites will use AWS to host their content, but then they have something called a cloud delivery network, or a CDN, that loads the website faster. So kind of think about it as Amazon is the warehouse for data, and the CDNs are like the shop fronts where you actually buy your goods. And so if I tried to go to a website that was using a CDN, the IP blocking tool would see the CDN's IP address and not realize that the content was actually coming from Amazon. So during this whole week, at this time I was working for a company called Gizmodo Media Group. And the whole week, Gizmodo.com was working for me. And I was like, oh, this is great. And then I went to our tech team and I said, hey, how do we host our content? And they're like, oh, we use AWS. And then we use Fastly in front of it. So I actually had Amazon was breaking through my blockage in a way that other companies weren't able to do for the rest of the week. Also, when I tried to avoid Amazon in the real world, I found it impossible. I needed this week a little phone holder for my car to plug into the air conditioning vent, which is something I would normally order on Amazon. But I found one on eBay, and I ordered it, and 2 days later when it came, as I'm demonstrating here, it came in the Amazon envelope with, the smiley face arrow. And so I contacted the eBay person, and I thought maybe this was arbitrage, where I ordered on eBay and then they ordered it from Amazon because it was cheaper. But in fact, the seller used a service called Fulfillment by Amazon, which is a service Amazon offers where they store your goods and they ship your goods. And so he used that, and that's why I ended up being shipped by Amazon. And it just illustrated for me how dominant a tech giant Amazon is, not just tech, but shipping of data, shipping of real packages, that its competitors are forced to use its services. So the next week I did Facebook, and Facebook was technically much easier to block. It didn't get around it like Amazon did, but from an identity perspective, this was probably my hardest week. So I actually completely deleted my Facebook account. I stopped opening Instagram and WhatsApp. And to my great surprise, I missed Facebook. I knew that I really loved the Instagram app. I use it a lot. It's where I share a lot of information because I have a more private network there. But I had kind of moved away, I thought, from Facebook because there's just been so many privacy violations that I had stopped posting as often. I just didn't look at it as often. But then this week, I discovered that I missed it. This was a week, this was in, I think, October of last year, and it was the week of both midterm elections in the US and Halloween. And so I was talking to my husband about how I was going to vote. California had a proposition to get rid of daylight savings time. And I was talking to my husband about, well, I don't know how I'm going to vote on this. And he said, oh, my cousin wrote a great Facebook post about it. You should go check it out. And I realized I couldn't. And that in general, even though there's been so much disinformation and misinformation around campaigns, I still enjoy Facebook as a place to talk about local elections and what people think of particular politicians and issues. And those conversations are just not happening as much in the offline world. We really have moved these conversations into the digital world, and particularly to Facebook, because Facebook has captured our social networks. And I tried to recreate this community or this function by going to another open source decentralized social network called Mastodon. And I set up an account and I tried posting a couple of things, but it just was not fulfilling in any way because my friends weren't there. And without your friends, you don't really have an effective social network. So it was just hard for me because I realized I couldn't share what was happening in my life with my friends en masse unless I sent like a group text message or a big email, and people just are not using those platforms anymore. And I also wasn't getting information about my social network. It was during this week that one of my very good friends, her name is Chico, she lives across the country from me, she had her baby. And I didn't find out until I turned my Facebook account back on a couple of weeks later, and I immediately called her and I said, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you'd given birth, I'm so happy for you. And she's like, well, why didn't you know? And I said, well, you didn't text me or tell me. And she says, well, I put it on Facebook. If I put it on Facebook, I expect everybody to see it. And I actually just finished working on a story about people who have their accounts disabled and can't get on Facebook. And it is incredible the information that you miss. People who, one person was telling me he went to a social event with a bunch of his friends, and he was like, "Hey, where's Henry?" His friend's husband, and everybody got really silent and said, "Henry died a couple of months ago," and he didn't know because he wasn't on Facebook to see it. So next up was life without Google, and Google was similar for me to Amazon, where it was hard to break free of, just because it's so woven into the infrastructure of the internet. And I especially was very dependent on many Google products. I use Gmail personally. My work also uses Gmail. I used Google as my search engine. I use Chrome as my browser. I use Google Calendar. I mean, it was incredible the extent to which I was dependent on Google. So I had to find all new products. And it actually wasn't as hard to switch as I thought. It took a couple of hours to kind of migrate everything over. But it wasn't as hard to get away from Google as I thought it was going to be. I had Google Maps I used. I discovered that MapQuest is still around and that they have an app, which really surprised me. Though I did find that a lot of the alternatives to Google don't work quite as well. Like MapQuest kept steering me into horrible traffic jams. The harder thing, though, wasn't giving up Google's direct services. It was discovering the extent to which Google was everywhere else on the web. The way my blocker was working is that it would allow assets from a company like Google to try to load, but it would stop them. And the effect of this is that as I tried to navigate the web, it took me back to the 1990s when I used to use a cable modem. And, I would sit at the family computer, which was in the living room so everybody could see what you were doing, and I would be trying to load usually the Silverchair fan club site, because I was a big fan of Silverchair, and I would have a book with me because it would take the website about 3 minutes to load. And that was the feeling that I had this week, because every website I went to tried to load assets from Google before they would even load their own content. So they'd be trying to load Google Ads, Google Analytics, various Google trackers, and especially something called Google Fonts. Almost every website I visited used Google Fonts, which is supposed to, ironically, make websites load faster because it's a preloaded set of fonts so that it doesn't have to rely on your browser or your computer to have it. But for me, it meant it slowed everything down. The other effect of life without Google is that like some things in my house, some of the devices stopped working because they essentially ping Google servers to see if the internet is working. And they figure if Google isn't working, then the internet is down. I went to Dropbox and I was trying to upload a file I need to send to somebody. And the Dropbox login page was there, and I kept putting in my name and my password, and I would hit login, and just nothing would happen. And so I contacted Dropbox, I looked at the HTML of their homepage, and I discovered that it linked to Google's privacy policy about a dozen times just on Dropbox's homepage. And so I reached out to them. I said, why is your site not working for me while I'm blocking Google? They said, we use this, it's kind of like a background CAPTCHA program that determines whether you're a bot or not, or if you're legitimate traffic. And so to Dropbox, because I was blocking Google, I looked like I wasn't human. I also discovered just how dominant Google is in the world of mapping. Almost every website and app I went to with a map in it was using Google Maps, even incredible Google critics like Yelp. Yelp has been really in a war with Google for years now because of the way that Google kind of pushed down results from Yelp and tries to serve its own content. But Yelp on its website, if you're searching for a restaurant and it shows you where they are, it's using Google Maps for that. And transportation apps like Lyft and Uber, one day I was running late for a meeting, so instead of taking the bus, I thought I would just call an Uber. And I opened the app, and I was trying to enter my address, and I just couldn't enter the address. And the same thing happened with Lyft. The app just wouldn't load. And it turns out that you can't say where you're going unless you're allowing Google to load. They cease to work. And that led me to discover this this is data from a company called BuiltWith, which tracks like what assets various websites use. And according to them, about 90% of websites that have an app are dependent on Google, have to have a map, are dependent on Google to supply that information. And this led me to discover that there had been a huge kind of revolt at the end of last year against Google because they decided to raise, for a long time Google Maps was very cheap to use, and last year they decided to raise the price per search that somebody did to your website. And it had gotten a lot more expensive, and all these developers were getting so angry because there wasn't really a competitor that could step into that space. Google had just offered the service, such a good service, for so little that everyone had become dependent on them. And at that point, there just weren't a lot of alternatives. Life without Microsoft was not too bad. Microsoft owns kind of the workhorses of social media, GitHub, LinkedIn, and Skype. And I do use LinkedIn and Skype a lot, but it was okay to go without them for a week. The thing that was harder about Microsoft was, one, it's a big cloud provider, so some websites stopped working. I check out books from the library on an app, and I couldn't read my library books that week. The bigger thing was Microsoft in the real world. So I had a Ford Fusion for a few months at this point. It was a long-term rental. And I did not notice until the week I gave up Microsoft that when I sat down in the car, there was a little placard that said Sync, powered by Microsoft. So Microsoft actually powered the kind of like navigation and entertainment system in the car. So during this week, I just didn't listen to the radio. But one thing I knew my blocker couldn't block was Microsoft in the real world. And Microsoft is still a huge company, one of the most valuable companies in the world, depending on what the stock market is up to in a given week. And they're a business-to-business company. And so I started to notice, like when I went into a restaurant, that they would be powering the point of sales service. And that, like the local transportation in San Francisco, it's called the BART, the Bay Area Rapid Transit, that they use Microsoft servers to kind of power the whole system. So the thing about Microsoft, it was just, I knew this was a failure in my experiment, that there were times I was interacting with them and I just couldn't really stop. Apple was a hard company for me to give up in terms of identity as well, just because I was really a total Mac head. I was using a MacBook Pro at home, a MacBook Air at work, I had an iPhone, and so I had to kind of change all the ways that I access the internet. And it was kind of like renting a car in a new country where you have to drive on the other side of the road. And it also was very visible to other people I was communicating with that I had gone off the system, because I started sending texts to people and they would get the green bubble instead of the blue bubble. And people were really responded to this. They'd be like, "Are you okay? Are you traveling? Did somebody steal your iPhone?" I mean, Apple has a good reason for having the blue bubbles. It tells you you're having an end-to-end, you're having an encrypted conversation with somebody in a way that you're not if you're communicating from iPhone to Android. But it also shouts to everybody, "Oh, this person is not in, Apple's gated community anymore." And this has actually been covered in terms of teenagers. They feel a real shame around being in the green bubble and not being in the blue bubble, and they get left out of conversations because of it. Because when you send a photo or a video via the green bubble, it's not as high resolution as being in the blue bubble. So all of a sudden, you'll just start getting left out of conversations. So I just found that leaving Apple's gated community was very hard. And part of this is, the way that Apple has designed their system. In one way, this is good for privacy, in that everything is so insular. If you're going to buy music, it's going to be through iTunes. It's only going to work on Apple. But it meant that it was hard to get my data out of Apple. And the one thing that happened to me is, for example, I started not getting messages from people because I would send them a text from, I got a phone I'll talk about later. I would send them a text, like I texted my husband. I said, hey, I have a new phone. And like minutes went by and an hour went by and he didn't respond to me, and I was getting a little annoyed. And then, so I called him and he said, oh, I did send you a message, but Apple had routed it to their own iMessaging system rather than sending it to my new phone. And so there was a real kind of capture when you're with Apple. And it was very hard for me to actually get my data away from Apple. So I experienced this when I was trying to export my contacts. And apparently if you have, I'm sure many people here have an Android, and if you want to like move your contacts from one phone to another, from one device to another, you can just do it via Bluetooth and just say, okay, send my contacts over there. But Apple doesn't let you do that. In order to get my contacts, I had to sign into iCloud. I had to download them, export and download them. And then I had to send that to the other device and open it. It was this whole process. And I also, my new phone couldn't handle the thousands and thousands of contacts that I had in my iPhone. And so I had to reduce it down. And so I took it down to the number of people that I actually thought I might talk to in the week, the people I'm like really in close communication with. And this ended up being 143 people, which was really incredible to me because this is Dunbar's number. Do people know what Dunbar's number is? So this is Robin Dunbar was a British sociologist, is a British sociologist who studied human communities, and he found that we tend to form these groups of about 150 people because that's the number of people that we can really keep in our minds. That's the number of people that you can remember their names, remember the details of their life, and that you can kind of effectively interact with. And so military groups tend to be 150 people. Neighborhoods tend to kind of be about 150 people. I just kept seeing this number over and over again. It's kind of a natural number for us. And this was so fascinating to me because we are in contact with so many more than 150 people on a regular basis now. You know, I discovered this experiment that I just had. I had like 2,000 contacts in my iPhone, over 1,000 contacts on Facebook, 10,000 contacts in my email. And I just wonder the kind of effect this has on us of feeling overwhelmed by technology, and that it's allowed us to be, it's a benefit that we can be in contact with so many more people, but it also is stressful. It's more people than our brains are kind of naturally designed to associate with. So during this week where I was trying to block these companies, this is how often my device tried to interact with them. And as you see, Amazon and Google are really standouts. This is because Amazon and Google are just so woven into the infrastructure of the internet that you can't avoid them. There were so many sites that were hosted by AWS, so many Google assets and trackers around the web. Facebook and Microsoft were a little bit less, and Apple, I think, was actually a bit of an anomaly because Dhruv, Dhruv, who was helping me with the experiment, had an Apple himself, and every time he logged into the network, it was showing as tracking. And on my first day, it was so hard to get away from Apple that I had to keep visiting their websites. So my last week, I blocked all of the tech giants. And the hardest part about this was that Apple and Google have a duopoly on the smartphone market. So there was not a smartphone available that I could buy that was not an Android device or an Apple device. So I had to go back to using a dumb phone, a Nokia 3310, which is like the little brick phone that many of you may have had in the early 2000s, and it still has Snake on it, I'm happy to report. Nokia had re-released the phone in 2017, kind of as a joke, because there was a meme about how indestructible the phone was. Like the Captain America had a shield that was just made out of Nokia 3310s. But also because they were hoping to sell them in Asia and Africa, places with kind of like what they thought would be low bandwidth, where people maybe didn't want smartphones. So I talked to their marketing officer about that, and he said that the company had been surprised that the phone was actually selling pretty well in the States, and now they're trying to market it kind of in the way that I was using the phone, where it's supposed to be a detox from using your smartphone, and also to parents who maybe want their kids to be that they can call their kids, but they don't want their kids to have access to the internet and social media. And it really did work for me this way. This is probably the greatest benefit of doing this experiment, was using the Nokia made me realize how many bad habits I had formed around my smartphone. It tended to be my smartphone, and it's been months since I've done the experiment, so I started to regress a bit, but it would be the first thing that I looked at in the morning and the last thing I looked at night, and I was just kind of like, I'd be interacting with my daughter, and I would just be kind of checking it every once in a while. And by using the Nokia, I would wake up in the morning and I'd grab the Nokia and there's just nothing to look at. I hadn't gotten any calls or texts over the night. So I would wake up in the morning and instead I would like talk to my husband and play with my daughter and just kind of be in my head, like drink coffee. And I realized that I was so much happier this way and that I felt a lot healthier, just mentally, psychologically. And so after the experiment ended and I went back to using my smartphone, I started turning it off at night, which is something I had never done before. I didn't used to turn off my iPhone. The only time it would turn off is if, the battery ran out. And so doing that has been a real improvement in my life, and it's just allowed me to step away from the internet in a way that I couldn't before. So I found that when I was doing this experiment, I was only using the internet, at least this week, only using the internet when I actually had a computer open in front of me, and that was nice in this kind of like mental health way. But it was also very hard. So if I was out driving, I didn't have an app that could help me navigate. So it just meant that I tended to go more to places I knew how to get to rather than exploring new places. And there were definitely drawbacks to not having access to the internet. I mean, the reason why we've become so dependent on these companies is that they do offer many benefits and change the world in many good ways, but there's just drawbacks as well. And as I realized when I gave a version of this talk in Kosovo, and it made me realize the extent to which cutting the tech giants out of my life is a real privilege. In Kosovo, they don't have access to many of these services. Google Maps isn't very functional in Kosovo, and you can't just order something on Amazon whenever you want. So it's kind of the privilege now is to step away from these things. So this was my tech giant avoidance kit. So a lot of these things are just because I didn't have my smartphone. So if I wanted to record an interview, I had to use a digital recorder. If I wanted to play music, I need an external speaker. I was printing a lot of maps. I had real books and movies because I couldn't access these things from the internet. I had to use cash if I wanted to avoid, like a Microsoft POS service. In a restaurant, luckily I still had this digital camera from my college days to capture videos and photos from the experiment. We made videos about this as well. And then I had a physical calendar, which, my brain basically is not capable of storing events anymore. And so if I left the calendar at home, I just had no idea what I was supposed to do for the day. And this is the Nokia phone, which I still have. And I'm starting to think I need to go back to it just to break my bad habits again. I also sought out a lot of alternatives this week because my experiment wasn't about trying to get away from the internet. I wanted to use an internet that was not controlled by these 5 companies that have gotten so big. Because they've gotten so big and so powerful, it's part of why we're seeing some bad actions now, because when you control a market and you don't have real competitors, you don't have incentives for better behavior. And so I wanted to see, are there viable alternatives out there? And so for search, I used a website called DuckDuckGo, which unlike Google, doesn't kind of keep track of your searches over time. It only bases the ads on what you're searching right then, and it's not tracking you from from search to search to search. And DuckDuckGo is a good, I find it a good search engine. The only problem was it wasn't, and I still use it, but it's not quite as good as Google, probably because it's personalized and they have so much data. So sometimes when I can't find something with DuckDuckGo, I go back to google.com to look for it. There's another one called Start Page. And for some reason, so Start Page didn't work for some reason when I was blocking Facebook. And DuckDuckGo didn't work when I was blocking Amazon because it is hosted by AWS. For browsers, there's Brave, there's Firefox, and if you're very private, there's Tor. And these are browsers that are really trying to incorporate privacy into their business model. Brave especially is doing some interesting things around getting rid of third-party trackers, so that only the website that you're visiting can track what you're doing, to try to kind of eliminate this ecosystem of having our every search mined. I had to use a service called OnionShare to share files because there was no file sharing service that I could use when I was blocking AWS. And OnionShare is a service that actually uses the dark web, that uses Tor in order to be able to send information, so you're doing it peer-to-peer. For my hardware, when I gave up the Apple computer, I could have used, there's lots of different companies that, there's non-Apple and non-Google alternatives available with the laptop, but I really like this Linux computer from a company called Purism, in part because their business model is designed for someone like me who is doing this experiment, that they're all about eliminating data slavery and data exploitation, and they want more of our technology to be open source and interoperable, and where you control your own data. And I really experienced this when I was doing video calls. I used this service called jitsi.org, and unlike Skype or FaceTime or Google Hangouts, you didn't have to have an account to use it. Any two people can just spin up Jitsi and have a call and then never use the service again, not store their data with the company for all time. It is this model of not based on accounts and keeping your data forever. And it was kind of a revelation to me because I've just gotten so used to the internet being this way, where you're making this trade-off where you're giving up your data in return for a particular service. I switched to there's private email providers that don't do the data mining that so many of the other services do. And then, as I mentioned, I tried to use Mastodon, but it wasn't very effective. And so what I ended up doing more when I wanted to talk to people, because the Nokia phone, I don't know if you remember this, but you had to do something called T9 texting, where you only have 9 numbers that represent all of the letters. So if you want to do cat, you have to push 2, 3 different, you have to just keep pushing all these buttons. So texting was horrible, and it took forever to compose a text. And I kept wondering, I wonder why we actually texted when it was this hard to do. And so when I needed to contact people, I would just call them. And this is actually wonderful because anytime I called somebody, they would just pick up on the first ring and be like, Kashmir, are you okay? What's wrong? Because I had just kind of stopped calling people. And it was a refreshing way of changing how I interacted with people. So this was during this last week when I'm using this Purism laptop. I don't have a smartphone. I'm avoiding all of the services offered by these companies. This is still how often I was kind of invisibly running into them. And again, as you see, Amazon is it's just incredibly just woven into the infrastructure of the internet. Same with Google, Facebook, and Microsoft to a certain extent. And then Apple has tried to make a big play recently around privacy. And I did find that it was the case that if you don't use Apple products, the company is not trying to track you. It's not trying to collect your data. And that's just not true. It's not true for other companies. So the question at the end of this is, what do we do about this? And these companies have become incredibly dominant. The internet in general, we're dependent on now for getting jobs, for meeting friends, for finding love, for using dating apps, for expression, for expressing our thoughts, our feelings. So much of the human experience now is mediated through the digital realm, for better or worse. And what I found with this experiment is that these companies increasingly are controlling that digital realm. I started to think of them as kind of the online government, where they have built the roads. They are what allow you to kind of be human online, and so they've gotten a lot of power because of it. And so there's a lot of critics now that are asking, well, what do we do? How do we create more competition? How do we kind of free people to make more choices online? I mean, what I found, for example, blocking Facebook, is there wasn't really a social network that was left to me. All of my friends were on Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp. I still use Twitter extensively, but my dad isn't on Twitter. My sister is not on Twitter. So yeah, this question of like what we do to give people control of their digital identity back. And I met this group of technologists who kind of live the way I was trying to live for 2 months, who are always trying to use non-proprietary services, things that are open source. And even they were impressed that I was blocking AWS. They said I was the kind of vegan who doesn't eat honey. But those technologists, one is Dan Congdon-Gilmore. He works at the ACLU, which is American Civil Liberties Union. And he was saying, well, one thing is we just need to get away from these services. If you're on Facebook, then you are bait for the surveillance society. If you're on Facebook and you're posting photos of your daughter to Facebook, that means the rest of your family has to be there to see it. So one of his pieces of advice was to step back. But he also said we should require services to be interoperable, like email. You can have Gmail, and he can have Hotmail, and she can have Yahoo, and we can all send each other emails. We aren't only able to talk to other people who have Gmail or Hotmail or Yahoo Mail. And so he was saying we should require these services to be more like that. You shouldn't have to be on Facebook to be invited to an event on Facebook. And you should be able to be on Pinterest and talk to somebody who is on Facebook. That would require re-architecting a lot of this technology, but that was his advice. And then letting people store their own data so that you don't have your data kind of held in a cloud. Policymakers, and there's been so much discussion of this in the US, I'm sure here as well, are saying we need to not let these companies get so powerful that they are able to crush the competition. And it was one question that was kind of raised by my experiment. I was able to live without Microsoft, and was that because there was this antitrust investigation into the company in the 90s that there's a debate about it, but that it changed the kind of future of Microsoft and made it less likely to crush competitors, so that companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon could thrive in the years after that. And so there's been a lot of talk about antitrust enforcement, breaking the companies up, and creating more rules to encourage competition. But anyways, yeah, so here's my contact information, and I hope this was helpful in just thinking about the roles that these companies play in shaping or controlling our identities. And thanks for having me here, and I'm happy to take questions.
So if you just pick like the top four, whichever of the top four you would like to talk to.
Okay, so I've been instructed to just take the top 4 questions. What was the most surprising piece of information that was collected and sent away as part of your experiment? So in this experiment, my data wasn't sent away. So I'm assuming this maybe is about the smart home story. And the smart home story, I mean, there were a lot of different things. The thing that was really interesting about the smart home story is that it wasn't just a kind of like a company or it wasn't just a company or like a server that was collecting my data. It was actually my colleague and friend Surya, who's a great guy, and I trust him with many of my secrets, but he became deeply uncomfortable how much he knew about our daily lives based on looking at all this data. And part of that was he lived in New York and I was in San Francisco at the time, and we would be like having a meeting in the morning on the phone, and he'd say like, "Oh, I see you haven't brushed your teeth yet today." And I was like, "Well, I work from home, so sometimes I don't get to it till later." One of the, for that experiment, I had a smart bed. It was like a mattress that you put over the bed that was supposed to give you a sleep score in the morning, and it had a microphone for detecting ambient noise, and it had sensors all over the bed so it could tell how much you were tossing and turning. So I felt that was like a deeply uncomfortable thing to have in my house, and my husband was not very happy about it. But we had data brokers that were looking at what we were watching on TV. So Surya could tell what we were binging on. It was the thing about a lot of the data is it wasn't deeply sensitive or intimate data, but it was just being able to collect it over time and how it revealed things about our lifestyle. So Surya knew when we went to bed at night, he knew when we put our daughter to bed and when we woke up. And so it was more just how much he was able to infer about our household. So as a journalist, I just have to write about the problem, and I don't necessarily have to come up with the solutions. So I don't know if the 5 big companies should be broken up or not, but I do think there's been a lot of good information written about this by scholars, and that people like Lena Khan, who's now working with Congress, I believe, on an antitrust committee. She wrote a big paper about how Amazon is already an antitrust. There's a group called the Open Markets Institute in the States, which is starting to get, I think, just a lot of traction around this argument. So I don't know if they should, but it is certainly looking more like a possibility than it did, 1 or 2 years ago. What can society do to stop big tech companies taking over such large swaths of our lives? Is it time for the 505 to be broken up? So Daniel Kahn Gilmore loved my experiment, but he said the danger of your experiment is that you're saying individuals need to be the ones to step away. And what I found is that it really was impossible. And when the experiment ended, while I did change my lifestyle a bit, I did have to go back to using these companies because I need them to do my journalism, to be in touch with family and friends. So I think as individuals, it is hard for us to kind of stop this path forward. And so I think it's going to require societal change in the same way, kind of similar to in the environment. The privacy environment is going to require kind of a big, it's going to require a government response. You can recycle, you can pick up trash, but if we want to protect the environment from climate change, it's going to require really big changes at the governmental level, and I do think it's very similar when it comes to privacy and control of our information. Do I feel comfortable logging into other websites using my Facebook or Google account? I definitely do this, and I was really worried when I gave up Facebook what that was going to mean, because I use Facebook to sign into Airbnb and Spotify, and I did discover that other websites, other companies seem to be planning for the obsolescence of these services, because you can delete your Facebook account and they still allow you to log in with an email and basically create another password. I'm kind of a fan of having separate points of entry to prevent one big breach affecting you, as long as you use a password manager and you're using like a very strong and unique password for every site. That said, at the same time that Google and Facebook have done so much to kind of invade privacy, at the same time, they are companies that are under a lot of scrutiny, and that can help to ensure better behavior by them. And so sometimes I worry more about the companies that we don't pay attention to at all, and what they're doing with our data. Like all of the many data brokers that you just have never heard of that have compiled huge dossiers on you, and what they're doing with that information. So, yeah, basically I worry about lots of different players, and I do think that Google and Facebook can be a good, at least a good way to log into other websites to keep your information safe, and I certainly do it. And if you do choose to create an individual identity for every site, then I would encourage you to use a password manager. All right. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashmir, for your insight. And one of the things I appreciated about our conversation this morning was part of your role as a journalist is to help make the invisible visible. So I really appreciate the work that you do, and the fact that you are reporting in one of the most powerful publications in the world, New York Times. You're flexing your muscle for good. Thank you. And hope you enjoy your gift from Amy Patina. So please, whānau, don't all rush at Kashmir over morning tea. Be cool, be cool. Give her a bit of space. But, just talk to her over the course of the day. If you do want to ask her for an autograph, again, just be cool.